Imagine a wealthy man who values his luxury bike above all else, clashing with a humble boy who unknowingly saves it from being stolen. Fueled by anger and prejudice, the man humiliates the boy, only to discover a shocking truth that changes everything. This is a story of assumptions shattered, unexpected lessons, and a powerful bond that will leave you inspired. Stay with us to witness a journey of transformation and forgiveness that proves kindness can change lives. Power, wealth, or a high rank may give you a sense of superiority for a moment, but remember, the day always comes when you're held accountable for your actions. Racism, belittling communities, or disrespecting others based on religion may seem unnoticed now, but justice has a way of finding its mark. Respect is not just about others. It defines who you truly are. Think about it. What will your legacy be? Here in the United States, the law is equal for everyone, no matter your community, race, or religion. Diversity is what makes America strong, and unity is our greatest power. We stand together, respecting one another and sharing a deep love for our country. Patriotism is not just about flags or borders. It's about embracing every individual who calls this land home. In the USA, injustice has no place. Together, we uphold justice, equality, and the shared dream of freedom. We love the USA, and the USA loves all of us. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The streets of Fairview were the picture of suburban tranquility. Rows of neatly manicured lawns lined the road, each home a testament to order and affluence. Among the most immaculate properties was the residence of William Harrow, a middle-aged man whose reputation for strictness and superiority was as well maintained as his front yard. Every detail of William's home reflected his personality. The hedges were trimmed to geometric perfection. The driveway gleamed as if freshly waxed, and his prized luxury bike sat prominently under the shade of a maple tree. For William, the bike was more than transportation. It was a symbol of his achievement, a statement of his refined tastes and social standing. William's pride in his possessions mirrored his disdain for anything he deemed beneath him. He carried an unspoken yet palpable air of prejudice, particularly toward the black community. He believed his status set him apart, an attitude that subtly infused his interactions with judgment and condescension. While he rarely expressed outright hostility, his piercing looks and dismissive words were enough to make anyone feel unwelcome. Not far from William's pristine world, Jordan was walking home from a nearby park. A 17-year-old boy with a quiet demeanor, Jordan was the epitome of respect and humility. Though his family lived modestly compared to their affluent neighbors, they were known for their hard work and generosity. Jordan's parents owned a small but thriving business, instilling in their son the values of perseverance and kindness. That afternoon, Jordan carried a brown paper bag containing his lunch, which he had bought from a local deli. He had planned to eat at the park, but the benches were full, and the quiet streets of Fairview seemed like a good alternative. Jordan's gaze landed on the shade of a large maple tree, where William's luxury bike rested under its canopy. To Jordan, it looked like an inviting spot to rest and enjoy his meal. With careful steps, Jordan approached the bike and set his lunch on its polished frame. He sat down on the stepped bar, making sure not to scratch or damage the glossy finish. Unfolding his sandwich, he relaxed in the shade, unaware of the storm brewing behind the nearby curtains of William's house. Jordan wiped the sweat from his brow as he sat down on the step bar of the luxury bike. He carefully balanced his brown paper bag on his lap and unwrapped his sandwich, taking a deep breath as the shade of the tree offered a much-needed respite from the midday sun. The polished frame of the bike gleamed under the dappled light, but Jordan paid it little mind. To him, it was just a temporary seat while he ate and rested. He had no idea that inside the house nearby, a pair of angry eyes were watching his every move. William stood at his window, sipping his iced tea, when he spotted Jordan. His face hardened, and his hand froze midair. To him, the sight of the young black boy sitting on his prized possession was an affront, a violation of his meticulously maintained world. He set his glass down sharply, muttering to himself about respect and boundaries. Within moments, his irritation boiled into fury, and he stormed toward the door, his steps muffled by his hunched-back muscles. Jordan looked up as the front door slammed open, startled by the sudden noise. He barely had time to register the furious figure approaching him before William's voice cut through the stillness of the street. "What do you think you're doing?" William bellowed, his face red with anger. His eyes darted between Jordan and the bike, as if confirming some imagined crime. Startled, Jordan stood up quickly, clutching his sandwich and bag. "I'm sorry, sir," he began, his voice calm but uncertain. I was just sitting here for a moment to eat." "I didn't mean what?" William interrupted, his voice rising with every word. "Didn't mean to scratch my bike? Didn't mean to steal it?" Jordan blinked, confused and hurt by the accusations. "No, sir, I wasn't." William cut him off again, stepping closer and towering over him. "This bike is worth more than you'll ever make in your life. Do you even understand that? You have no right to be near it, let alone sitting on it. Get away from it now." As if to punctuate his rage, William snatched the brown paper bag from Jordan's hands and hurled it onto the pavement. The sandwich spilled out, landing face down on the ground. A smear of mayonnaise and lettuce scattered across the concrete. Jordan stared at the mess, his chest tightening. His first instinct was to defend himself, to explain that he had no intention of causing harm, but the words caught in his throat. He knew from experience that arguing would only escalate the situation. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, he bent down, picked up the remnants of his lunch, and stood upright. "I'm sorry for upsetting you," Jordan said quietly, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "It won't happen again." He turned and began walking away, clutching the crumpled paper bag in his hand. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of exhaustion, but because of the weight of humiliation. He kept his head high, though his heart ached. Several neighbors had witnessed the scene from their porches and windows, drawn by William's shouting. Their eyes followed Jordan as he walked down the street, some murmuring quietly among themselves. A few exchanged looks of disapproval at William's behavior, but none stepped forward to intervene. As William stood by his bike, his chest heaving with residual anger, a small part of him felt unsettled, The boy's calm response and quiet dignity contrasted sharply with the fury he had just unleashed. For a moment, he considered calling out to him, but his pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, he turned back toward his house, muttering under his breath about people who didn't know their place. The street grew quiet again, but the tension lingered, like an unspoken question hanging in the air. Jordan walked on, leaving behind not just his ruined lunch, but an impression that would soon force William to confront the man he had become. As the day wore on, William busied himself in his meticulously organized home, trying to shake off the lingering unease from his confrontation with the boy earlier. He told himself he had acted rightly, defending what was his. Yet a small, nagging doubt refused to let him feel settled. His irritation grew as he replayed the moment in his mind, the boy's calm demeanor clashing with his own outburst. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, William heard a knock at his front door. He opened it to find his neighbor, Mr. Adams, standing on the porch. Mr. Adams was a retired schoolteacher, known in the neighborhood for his friendly and observant nature. He held a mug of tea in one hand and a curious expression on his face. "Evening, William," Mr. Adams greeted, his voice steady but with a hint of concern. "Got a minute?" William nodded, stepping aside to let the older man in. "What's on your mind?" Mr. Adams took a seat in the living room, setting his mug down on the polished coffee table. "I saw what happened earlier with that boy," he began, his tone measured. "Quite the scene, I must say." William stiffened, his jaw tightening. "What about it? The kid had no business near my bike." Mr. Adams raised an eyebrow, his gaze calm but piercing. "Did it ever occur to you that he might have been doing you a favor?" William blinked, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" The older man sighed, leaning forward. "Before that boy sat down, I saw two men standing on the corner across the street. Shifty-looking types, if you ask me. They were eyeing your bike like hawks. I even considered calling the police, but the moment that boy sat down, they moved on. Didn't even glance back." William stared at his neighbor, the weight of the words sinking in slowly. "Are you saying he stopped them just by being there?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, Mr. Adams replied. "Whatever their intentions were, they thought twice when they saw him sitting there. If he hadn't been there, I'd bet good money your precious bike would be long gone by now." A cold wave of realization washed over William. He felt his face flush as he recalled the scene, his harsh words, his furious accusations. The way he had snatched the boy's lunch and thrown it to the ground. He had been so consumed by his assumptions, so blinded by his prejudice, that he hadn't even considered the possibility that the boy's presence might have been fortuitous. I didn't know," William muttered, his voice quieter now. "I thought he was—" Mr. Adams gave him a pointed look. "You thought he was trouble. That's what you thought." William's chest tightened as guilt began to seep in. He replayed the encounter in his mind, but this time he saw it differently. He saw the boy's startled expression, his polite attempts to explain, his quiet dignity as he walked away with his ruined lunch. And now he knew that boy had unknowingly saved something William valued so highly. "I overreacted," William admitted, his words heavy with shame. "I misjudged him." Mr. Adams nodded. "It takes a big man to admit that. But maybe you should do more than just admit it to yourself." "What do you mean?" William asked, though he already had a sense of where this conversation was going. "Find him," Mr. Adams said simply. "Apologize. Show him you're better than what he saw earlier. He deserves that much." William sat in silence for a long moment after Mr. Adams left. The house, once a haven of pride and order, now felt uncomfortably quiet. The truth of Mr. Adams's words weighed heavily on him, and for the first time in a long while, William began to question not just his actions, but the beliefs that had fueled them. That evening, as he sat on his couch staring at the polished frame of his bike through the window, William made a decision. He didn't know how the boy would react, but he knew he had to make things right. It wasn't just about the bike anymore. It was about confronting the man he had become and finding a way to change. William spent the next morning nervously pacing his living room. The guilt gnawed at him, refusing to be ignored. Determined to make things right, he decided to find the boy and apologize. He asked around the neighborhood, describing Jordan to a few neighbors, until one elderly woman pointed him in the direction of the boy's house, not far from the park. When William arrived, he was surprised by what he saw. The house wasn't modest, as he had assumed it would be, but a beautifully maintained property. A sleek black car and a vibrant red convertible were parked in the driveway, both polished to perfection. The front yard was adorned with well-tended flowers, and the porch had elegant furniture that spoke of both taste and comfort. For a moment, William hesitated, feeling suddenly out of place in the presence of such understated elegance. Summoning his courage, he walked up to the door and knocked lightly. After a few moments, the door opened, and there stood Jordan, his expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. "Mr. Harrow?" Jordan asked cautiously. "Jordan," William began, his voice faltering for a moment, I came to apologize. May I come in?" "Yes, of course." Jordan, tell Jordan Kentuckian High has approved Jordan's request for music." Jordan hesitated, but his upbringing and kindness won out. He stepped aside, allowing William to enter. As William crossed the threshold, he couldn't help but take in the interior of the house. The walls were adorned with framed photos of Jordan's family, smiling faces at graduations, awards ceremonies, and vacations. One wall featured a large family portrait with Jordan in the center, wearing a medal around his neck. Another displayed several trophies and plaques, all bearing Jordan's name. William's gaze lingered on the shelves lined with books, the modern yet inviting furniture, and the overall warmth of the home. It was clear that this family had built a life of accomplishment and stability. His prized bike, the object of his misplaced pride, suddenly seemed trivial in comparison. "I didn't expect," William trailed off, his words failing him as he continued to look around. Jordan raised an eyebrow but didn't respond, waiting for William to continue. William turned to face the boy, his expression heavy with guilt. "Jordan, I need to apologize for how I treated you yesterday. I misjudged you in every possible way, and I said things I'm deeply ashamed of. You didn't deserve that." Jordan crossed his arms, his demeanor calm but firm. "Why did you say those things?" he asked. "You didn't even know me." William sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I let my own prejudices cloud my judgment. I assumed things about you that weren't true, and I acted out of anger and ignorance. I was wrong." Jordan studied him for a moment, his young face holding a maturity far beyond his years. "I appreciate the apology," he said finally, "but you have to understand how it felt to have someone treat me like that just because of who I am." "I do," Willem said softly. "And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. You didn't just sit there to eat your lunch. You saved my bike without even realizing it. I can't thank you enough for that, and I hope you'll forgive me." Jordan's expression softened. "It's not about the bike, Mr. Harrow. It's about how we treat each other. My parents taught me that respect and kindness matter more than anything else." William nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Your parents raised you well," he said. "You've shown more grace and dignity than I deserve." At that moment, Jordan's mother appeared in the doorway, her expression curious. "Jordan? Everything all right?" Jordan turned to her with a small smile. "Yeah, Mom. This is Mr. Harrow. He wanted to apologize." Her gaze shifted to William, and though there was a flicker of protectiveness in her eyes, she offered a polite nod. "Well, Mr. Harrow, why don't you stay for dinner? We were just about to set the table." William looked startled, glancing at Jordan, who simply shrugged. "It's up to you," Jordan said, "but my mom's cooking is hard to pass up." For the first time in years, William felt truly humbled. "I'd be honored," he said quietly. Dinner was a warm and welcoming affair. William sat at the table with Jordan and his family, listening to their stories, laughter, and conversations about life. He learned about their journey, their challenges, and the values that had guided them to success. By the end of the evening, William felt like a different man. The walls of prejudice he had built over decades were beginning to crumble, replaced by a newfound respect for the people he had once unfairly judged. As William stood to leave, Jordan walked him to the door. "Thank you for coming," Jordan said, offering a genuine smile. "It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong." William nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for forgiving me," he said, "and for showing me what true strength looks like." They shook hands, and as William walked back to his car, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The encounter had changed him in ways he hadn't thought possible. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for the possibility of a better, more understanding world. As William drove home that evening, the quiet hum of the car was accompanied by a whirlwind of thoughts. The dinner with Jordan and his family had been more than just a meal. It had been a lesson, a mirror held up to his own shortcomings. He thought about Jordan's quiet dignity, his family's warmth, and the stark contrast between the person he had assumed Jordan to be and the person he truly was. The realization was humbling. For years, William had built his identity around possessions and status, using them as measures of worth. But now, the polished frame of his luxury bike seemed insignificant compared to the depth of character he had witnessed in Jordan and his family. As he pulled into his driveway and glanced at the bike under the tree, he felt a pang of regret for the way he had allowed his biases to dictate his actions. In the weeks that followed, William made a conscious effort to change. He started small, greeting neighbors he had once ignored, and taking time to listen to others without judgment. His encounters with Jordan became more frequent as well. The boy, initially hesitant, began to open up, sharing stories of his ambitions and dreams. William, in turn, shared his own life experiences and dreams. Finding common ground in their mutual respect for hard work and integrity. Over time, their connection blossomed into an unexpected friendship. William began to see Jordan not just as a boy who had saved his bike, but as a young man with remarkable potential. He offered advice when Jordan sought it, and in doing so found himself taking on the role of a mentor. But it wasn't a one-sided relationship. Jordan taught William about humility, about the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances, and about the power of forgiveness. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch of William's home, watching the golden light of the setting sun, William turned to Jordan with a thoughtful expression. "You've taught me something I didn't even know I needed to learn," he said. "That real value isn't in what we own, but in how we treat people. I'm ashamed of how I acted that day, but I'm grateful for the chance to make it right." Jordan smiled, his eyes reflecting the same kindness he had shown from the start. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What matters is what we do after we realize them." William nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle deep within him. He knew there was no erasing the past, but he also knew that his future actions could honor the lessons he had learned. He began to share the story of his transformation with others in the neighborhood, encouraging them to look beyond appearances and embrace empathy. The impact was subtle at first, but as more people heard William's story, a ripple effect began to take shape. Neighbors who had kept to themselves started connecting with one another, inspired by the idea that understanding and kindness could bridge even the deepest divides. On a quiet evening, months after that fateful day, William sat on his porch alone, reflecting on how much his life had changed. The bike still stood under the tree, but it no longer represented pride or status to him. Instead, it served as a reminder of the boy who had unknowingly saved it and, in doing so, had saved William from the confines of his own prejudice. William leaned back, a small smile on his face, and thought of Jordan. The boy's grace, his wisdom beyond his years, had sparked a transformation that William hadn't thought possible. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace, not because of what he owned, but because of who he was becoming. This story didn't end with William and Jordan. It became a message, one that William carried with him wherever he went, that kindness and understanding have the power to break down walls, and that humanity is far too complex to be reduced to assumptions. It was a lesson he would share for the rest of his days, a testament to the boy who had changed his life forever. The story emphasizes the profound impact of empathy and the dangers of making judgments based on appearances or preconceived notions. It shows how humility and understanding can bridge divides, fostering connections that transcend differences. Jordan's maturity and forgiveness act as a catalyst for William's transformation, demonstrating the far-reaching power of kindness. Through self-awareness and reflection, William grows into a more compassionate person, highlighting the importance of confronting and overcoming personal biases. The narrative serves as a reminder that understanding and grace can inspire meaningful change and break down barriers. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments. How did it make you feel? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment where kindness or understanding broke down barriers? Tell us your real-life stories of transformation and forgiveness. Your experience could inspire others to see the world differently and spread positivity. Power, wealth, or a high rank may give you a sense of superiority for a moment, but remember, the day always comes when you're held accountable for your actions. Racism, belittling communities, or disrespecting others based on religion may seem unnoticed now, but justice has a way of finding its mark. Respect is not just about others. It defines who you truly are. Think about it. What will your legacy be? Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories.